Yeah.
Okay, it started up. So yeah, this first time I've ever sent out a link. I've always got links. And also I have no agenda here. My only agenda is I'm getting old, and there's a couple of people, you're one of them, that I always feel a kinship to, but I really don't know much about what you're about and what you've done. I know some of what you've done, but I thought it'd be good just to get to know each other a bit and ask each other questions. And then if we like it, we can, make a video of it. If not, we don't have to worry about it.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Fellow Cancerians.
Oh, we are. What's your birth date?
July 21, 48.
Yeah, I'm at 18, July 18th, 41. So
Yeah.
I'm getting old at this point. So
you've been having the Pluto transit opposite Sun like I'm getting now.
forever, ever. I just got over. It's been not easy. I mean, first of all, life is not easy at 82 years old.
No.
Anyway, so it's hard to say whether it's Pluto or you're just getting old. But whatever it is, yeah, I've watched it creep by my sun or my Earth, even more important. Yeah. So what are there anything you want to ask me? Or I know that we both like music.
Yeah, yeah. I've backed off of my astrology. I mean, I stopped doing readings entirely about 2 years ago to be able to finish up that recent book that I got out. But I've also, tried to get back a little bit more into music. I never stopped playing. I always played in cover bands and on the weekends, a little stuff here and there.
What do you play? What instrument?
I'm an electric guitar player. I started on trumpet and, I went to bass, and then I wound up in the 70s on guitar. And so I play guitar, a little harmonica, not very well.
What kind of guitar?
I got a bunch of them, but the ones that I use the most, I have an SG.
Oh yeah.
I got one of those in the late 60s, early 70s, and I played it for a long time. Then I sold it. And then I got another one about 15 years ago, a newer one, 2000, I guess, this year. But they're good. They're light, and they have that fat humbucker sound. And so I play a lot with that. And then I also have a Jaguar, which is heavy as hell. It's like as bad as a Les Paul, but I play a little bit in a surf band, and it sounds good for that.
Well, yeah, I started out with rhythm guitar. I had a Epiphone Sheridan, which is now worth about $3,000 or $4,000. I don't have it anymore, but I mostly was a singer and a harmonica player.
Yeah, the prime movers, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that was we started in 1965, the same time that Grateful Dead started. I'm also pretty much of an expert on rock and roll posters. I don't know whether you know that, but
no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've written, 500 books or booklets on it.
Wow, that I missed. I used to collect the posters from Haight-Ashbury because I was out there, and they had nice artwork, and there were posters and there were postcards. So I'll bet you're an expert on all those.
I am. I mean, I owned all. I don't own them anymore because they just had to be in a vault all the time. And
yeah,
I said screw that. But I took pictures of 30-some thousand of them, high res picture. I'm a photographer, also, and so then I sold most of them. But sure, I know all the Family Dog, all the Fillmore, all the new Fillmore. I had all the Grandy posters except one. Anyway, stuff like that. And I also made my own posters. So I did. I was totally I'm totally into art, especially commercial art that is meaningful, like concerts. not, not the promo posters. I don't have any of those, but I had, posters that were worth $20,000 each. But I sold it all a long time ago. Screw that is what I said. I never looked at them, right? But I know them. I'm really visual in a sense that when I took algebra 1 3 times, and then they pushed me out just through. But I got all A's in geometry, so I'm really good at visual stuff.
I always like geometry better too.
Well, that's beautiful, right? I mean, now that I have Chat GPT, I'm understanding algebra better because I can ask it to do stuff, and it shows me how it does it. So, oh yeah, that's how you do it, right? That kind of stuff. And anyway, music, I played for maybe 7 years, and then I got married and played less, and then none. Occasionally, I have a daughter who's really getting famous.
Yeah, she's playing in Amherst next month. I think I'll go down and see her.
Well, if you send me I mean, I can probably get you in free.
It's at the Drake.
It's what?
It's at the Drake. It's a new venue in Amherst, relatively new, I guess about a year ago. And they've got some, big name bands coming here, in my mind, big name bands and singers. And I saw May Erlewine and I thought, oh yeah, I'll go down and check her out.
Yeah, it's May Erlewine, but by all means, I mean, I'd love to introduce you to her. She's a gifted songwriter. She writes incredible songs. And
I looked on YouTube. I looked her up on YouTube. She's very good.
Yeah, she is good. And I just saw her the other day. She was playing in Ann Arbor, which is where I grew up. And she had a whole plaza of people, maybe, I don't know, 800 people. It was wonderful. Then I got in a tornado. I got in this incredible tornado, the 7th largest one ever in Michigan. And it barreled down I-96, which is an expressway, because it must have liked the feel of it. And I was had I not stopped for 10 minutes because of the pouring, the winds and the rain, I would have been right in it. And I saw 12 or more semis on their backs, on their sides. And it picked one of those semis up with 63,000-pound load, just lifted it right off the ground, according to the driver. But
you don't want to be under a Pluto transit and anywhere near a tornado.
Well, I was born with Pluto in the sun, so.
Not
not
an attractor.
It is an attractor. It's a great attractor, right? So.
Oh,
but anyway, so music. Yeah, we love it. I mean, I know a lot of music, and I know a lot of classical music, but I specialized in blues. I had a blues band.
Yeah.
But I also interviewed almost any blues player you could name, scores of them.
I've read some of your stuff on it.
I
also like the blues, but I'm younger than you, and I came up listening to really a lot of surf music and some doo-wop.
Like Beach Boys or
what's that?
Beach Boys, or what kind of stuff?
A little bit, but more the instrumental stuff like Link Ray and Johnny and the Hurricanes. Wayne Eddy,
of course. Link Ray, of course.
Yeah, and so I was into that, and where am I going with this? I just lost my train of thought.
I do it all the time. I'm glad to see someone else does it.
Yeah, but the blues, what happened to me was, it was when the British invasion bands came out. First it was the Beatles, but then I got into the Kinks and the Rolling Stones and the Yardbirds and the Animals, and they were all playing blues, and I had not heard of it. I grew up outside of New York, and they'd never played any blues. I mean, it was unheard. I didn't know anything about it. So I'm listening to these songs like the first Rolling Stones albums, and these are great songs. Slim Harpo, who the hell is this?
Right.
And so I started digging in the record stores, and I picked up lots of records, albums of these people and, early blues artists. And eventually they started coming around to Rutgers, where I was. And I got to see almost every year for about 5 years, Muddy Waters came. And he did a real nice, intimate concert in Kirkpatrick Chapel. And we used to
Wow.
like sit down right in front, and he would do, Mojo and all this stuff. And yeah,
Right.
so I really got a taste for it, and I played. We had my band at the time did a lot of that bluesy stuff. We were these white suburban blues guys. Sort of like copying Eric Clapton and John Mayall and all that more than the originals, because we couldn't be like the originals.
Well, I got to know we were just a skip and a jump from Chicago.
Oh, well, that's the main center there
For electric
yeah,
blues.
it's
And also
Mecca.
we helped to put on the 1969 and 1970. I wrote a book about it, the Ann Arbor Blues Festivals. It was the largest collection of blues artists ever, because it was so close. They brought their families and their friends. And aside from, showing a bunch of white people what it was about, they were having a celebration amongst themselves. They'd never, maybe in a gig or something, they'd have two of them crisscrossing at the same time, but I don't think they'd ever been with hundreds of them ever. And so it was like somewhat of and I was in charge of serving them food and drink. So I was very popular, especially with the drink. And I got in, that's how I got into creating the all music guide, because I started interviewing these guys, and I was totally respectful. I was never an arrogant, might be arrogant now about astrology or something, but then I studied black music for about 7 years straight with all my heart.
Yeah, and that's a rich vein.
Well, it was so great. And, I would sit, and when they came to this blues festival, like people like Big Boy Crudup, who wrote Elvis's first tune.
That's all right, Mama.
That's right. That's all right, Mama. And they came like a week early for reasons no one understood. And the university put them up. And we would just go up to I went up to Big Boy Crib's room one night with my brother Dan, and this huge guy, he's a big guy, comes to the door, opens it, and my brother Dan opens his vest, and there was a bottle of Jack Daniels. And he just said, "Come on in, boys." and we did the same thing with Big Mama Thornton and all these guys. And so, and the Butterfield Band was a real close friend of ours, or not close meaning we followed them around and loved everything they did because they were incredible.
Yeah, it was a great band. I got to see them early on a few times.
Oh yeah,
New York.
Yeah, but I used to be, I helped record. I did an early recording of East West, which you probably know what that is.
Oh yeah.
And they'd published that later, but before they made the record. And we were behind a curtain in Chicago with a little reel-to-reel tape record. Anyway, music is like a big part of my life. I mean, Eric Clapton, I watched him shoot up Speed, and I opened for Cream in the Fillmore in 1967. And that's what I met him, but it was not like any real meeting or anything. It was not like talking like we're talking. So anyway, that's cool. So you played in bands and all that stuff.
Yeah, in a way, I think my strong suit in music is that I'm a generalist. That I can sing lead, I can sing harmony, I can play harmonica, I can play bass, I can play rhythm guitar, I can play lead guitar. I can move around if I have to. I could take situations, so that's good. But I'm not, like I'm a jack of all trades. But I write songs. I've written a lot of songs, and some of them, I mean, they're like sketches. Some of them are a little bit more complex, but I think a lot of them are pretty good. Some have been recorded. Some got radio play, but not very much. I never kind of was able to break through. My weakness is that I just don't have a great voice, and I think that's something that you're born with, and I wasn't. And even with some practice, it's adequate. I stay in tune. I can nail the harmonies, and that's that I would consider my strong suit.
Well, you
and
must
the third thing is that I learned I'm pretty good at being in a bar band.
Well, yeah,
that's my strength.
That's all we did, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm still doing it.
So you must know John Townley and his music.
Yeah.
I mean, John and I've known each other for a long time, but he has a great music background.
Yeah, he does the old sailing songs.
Well, even before that, he did. He can do
the Magicians. He was in the Magicians.
That's right, but he could do Reverend Gary Davis stuff.
Yeah.
And he actually spent a lot of time with them and stuff like that. So that was what would have interested me, especially. Yeah, I love John. He's And he's still the same today as he was 40 years ago, right? He's just John, right?
Yeah.
He's pretty upbeat, and in fact, sometimes when I don't know you, I say, well, I bet you're a lot like John, because he's very scientifically oriented.
Yeah.
Or he was. I haven't had extensive astrology. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit of astrology.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, I have to ask you. So did you learn to play blues harmonica?
When I was playing, we were playing Rolling Stones and Yardbirds tunes
Yeah,
in the 60s. So I could do that stuff.
Yeah, well, that's
when it got a little bit more complicated, like you have to soak the harmonica and get the high notes and all the other stuff.
No, you don't do that. No, I would never do that. But
that's what you buy the Marine band, and they were wood, and they would sound fuller, and then you have to have a better mic. I just kind of like, I play harmonica on a couple songs now, but just a couple riffs, and very simple.
Soaking them is not what you want to do. That destroys them.
Oh yeah, I found that out. Yeah, they just warp.
Yeah, I did that. Played amplified harmonica like a trumpet, basically. I'll send you some. Give you an idea sometime. But anyway, let's talk some astrology. All I know, I know very little, other than every time I come across your stuff or your books or anything like that, I say, yeah, this is kind of like me in a lot of ways. But I think you're much more organized. I'm very organized in terms of documenting. I'm an archivist, basically, of popular culture. Created the largest music database in the world.
Yeah, I know. I've used it. It's great.
And one of the two largest film databases, and the largest rock and roll poster database, and other stuff. So, but when I read your stuff, you seem to be set on something. You really look into it, pretty detailed. And I just wonder how you fit in, or you can just talk to me or ask me questions about my astrology. I looked at your chart too, which I imagine you've looked at. I don't know if you've ever looked at your helio chart.
Oh yeah.
Have you looked at what it is? It's quite amazing. What's amazing about it to me, for instance, is the fact that the planets heliocentrically are pretty evenly distributed, which is pretty rare. And what it means is that despite the personality, which is the circumstantial chart, the geocentric chart, having that in the helio means you're very, very even-minded, very fair, and it's unusual. It's unusual to see, especially when you have them all distributed like you do. And we also have like a very accurate mystic rectangle, which I usually find in psychologists and people like that. But obviously, it's interesting. When sometime we could talk about it even a bit.
Yeah, I dabbled with some helio, largely due to stuff that you wrote, and I look at it from time to time, in particular for weather and solar activity.
Yeah.
I did use it for a time in readings, but I trimmed my methodology because I was under pressure to do 4 readings a day to make a living.
Right.
And so I just settled on a few techniques so I could get through. And I didn't have the time to like prepare a chart and ponder over it for an hour and then do the reading. I was the kind of astrologer that I start reading the chart the moment the client is there or connects on the phone.
No, but I do the same thing. I never prepare. Charles Harvey, you know who that was?
Yeah.
Charles Harvey would spend 6 hours preparing for a reading. He was a good friend of mine and one of the great human beings I ever met in astrology. But me, I'm just like you. I'm good to go, and I'm starting right out. But I use the heliocentric chart. I don't know how to explain it. The geocentric chart to me is what I call the karma chart. It's the circumstances in which you're going to have to live. And the heliocentric chart is the dharma chart. It's going to be the archetype or the dharma that you have to live in those circumstances. So when I did readings, I would always look at the helio first and often never even get beyond it, just because it's so rich in meaning. And then also, I think one of the things that I've heard some, that I'm really into what we call attitude, inclination. And I like all the different coordinate systems because they're differently inclined. And the difference in inclination is something that astrologers completely ignore. They don't, but it makes, if you understand what I'm talking about, that
I'm not sure.
I'm saying, well, inclination would be that if you look at your horizon system, it's going to be tilted and inclined in a certain way. And if you look at heliocentric or geocentric or any of the coordinate systems, or even the planets to each other, they have different inclinations to one another. They have nodes, and they have nodes.
Yeah. They're not the same.
They're not the same, but they're also, you can have them at a square point to another planet. I wrote a book in 1976 called Interface. And what it was is just a careful calculation, accurate calculation on a mainframe before I had computer, of all the inclinations of each of the planets, not just to the Earth, which my friend Landscheid did, but to one another. And I found it really, really interesting.
I'm still not sure. Inclinations, are you talking about the inclination of the polar axis or the inclination of the location of the planet in one coordinate system to its location in another coordinate system?
Yeah, you can do that. That would be fine. It has to do with our attitude, right? How we see it. And so we also, what's the old thing? It says, as above, so below. You know that.
Yeah.
But but they also say, but after another manner. And so it's easy to think of nested things, bigger things embracing things that are lesser. But astrologers have never understood that one system can also be inclined differently to another system. And so we never take inclination into account, or even the inclination through the latitude of planets. Astrologers don't even look at them. At it.
Yeah, so anyway, some do.
Some do, but they do. But I'm not. I like astrologers. I love astrologers, but I don't necessarily like them in the sense of what they do is pretty primitive. And from what little I've read of your stuff, you're not like that. You're. What am I saying? I'm saying astrology is cultural astronomy. If you're not paying attention to astronomy, you're not doing astrology. That's my view. A symbolic astrology is, I can speak it and use it. I understand it, but I would never bother with it. I mean, if you talk it, I can talk back to you about it. But I very much believe, and I think you do from all the stuff that I've read, that you're looking at very, very exact, cycles.
Yeah, I got into Uranian astrology early on. In my first, when I first came across astrology and began to take it seriously was probably about 1967, something like that, 68. I had a girlfriend that had some astrology books, and there were other things, but I wound up getting some Alan Leo books. So I was first influenced by him. But that was when I wanted to be a musician, but it was hard. I was like, I could just see like what a difficult job this was going to be. And then I came across astrology, and it was the second thing in my life that I said, wow, this, I want to do this. I'd been in college and studied other subjects. None of them really interested me that much, but astrology did. So I dove in, and I got lucky in some ways. I got hooked up with some of the Iranian people in New York. And
which ones?
Gary Kristen, Wayne Boer,
Wayne Boer,
Zerka. There was somebody else there. Well, Hans Nigeman. We used to go over to his apartment.
Wow.
And so there was that input early on in my astrology, and I read a lot of technical stuff. I could do the math. That wasn't pretty much my problem, but because of that, it opened up insights into astrology that I might not have had otherwise, like the nature of coordinate systems and, why house cusps vary and that sort of thing. So I was, got involved. And so I decided to make a career out of it. And then I realized after a few years that if I was going to do that, I really had to be able to punch out those readings, because I couldn't answer an ad for a job as an astrologer.
No.
And I hustled and wrote articles and wrote books and gave talks and lectures and whatnot. But the bread and butter was really coming from readings. And so I had to, that was the compromise. I don't think I was always delighted that I had to be a counselor, but I liked it enough and tried to get better all the time. I was, very aware of my limitations and how I could get better. So I did it. For about 4 decades, I made a living as an astrologer. And, it's enough for a house and a little family and a car and no real debt, Well,
that's, the way I got into it was because I grew up, I'm older and kind of in the heyday of modern psychology. And so that instead of having classic virtues like nobleness and stuff, we had paranoid and schizophrenic. And so that really offended me, because from all of that, which was very popular, I had trouble building any sense of who I was. And so that when I found astrology, it was a coherent way of looking at me that, it wasn't quite like noble and stuff like that, but it was something that I could accept. And so that's how I got into it, is because it gave me a better picture of myself. And then, of course, as an astrologer, we go crazy trying to look at our chart in 100 different ways and try to squeeze something out of it. And I ended up in heliocentric because I had to program it. And when I started looking at it, I realized that I tried all my techniques on it, all the things. Oh, this is, your Mars is in Aries in your geochart, but it's in Aquarius and in Helio. So maybe you're a hothead, but you accomplish things by your energy. That's just typical astrology. But kind of like the sun rising, as I looked at the Helio, I gradually realized, no, these patterns are completely different. You know the word magnitude, right?
Oh, yeah.
A different magnitude.
Order of magnitude.
It was a different order of magnitude, and something I had tried to squeeze everything I could out of the geochart. But mostly I'm spiritually oriented. I like spiritual stuff. And so that once I got into the Helio, I actually transmigrated from thinking of myself as I did through my geochart to seeing myself as my Helio chart. It was like a form of transmigration. It was an incredible empowerment. And I realized also that astrologers as a group, 500 years ago, never did that. They still thought everything revolved around them, right? Copernicus, right? Yeah. So anyway, I don't want to bore you with that. I just want to sort of say that's how I got into Helio, because it worked. And
yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and my dabblings in Helio never, brought me to a condition that it didn't work. I just found that having to crank out, a lot of chart readings a week in order to pay the bills was essentially the same thing as being in a bar band and having to play Proud Mary every night.
Right.
That there was just a very practical reality that I needed to face up to if I was going to make any kind of a living at it. And so my astrology was primarily practical, pragmatic. I would tell people, I would give them information to help them with self-knowledge. And I always made sure that was, I consider that to be the real benefit of astrology. But then I would look at their, conditions for the year ahead, analyze the relationships, look at their location, look at, compatibilities and that sort of thing. So I was presenting them with very practical information, and they would come back. So I had a steady steady gig, but it was like a bar band, you know, it was like playing covers, and there wasn't a lot of room for research. And my problem was I always had these other interests. Like I was always still interested in music, and I really got into hiking and skiing. And I wrote a bunch of hiking guides for the Northeast. And,
Wow.
you know, and I was a cross country skier, but I got into downhill when I moved to Massachusetts so I can get up to Vermont. And so that was always a distraction that I liked. So that, you know, that's what you get when you have Venus conjunct Uranus in Gemini opposite Jupiter in Sagittarius. You know, you're kind of spread out, and you got to make these tough choices. So I opted for having a stable income and being and not, you know, I saw what my friends in music were doing, and the ones, a few of them made it, so to speak, but most of them didn't. And it was really luck of the draw. I mean, it's like who you knew, and
It's true.
to a large extent, you know, I knew really talented people that never got anywhere, and others that were half-assed, but knew somebody and got into it just fell into it. You know, it didn't work for me. My 11th house geocentric is not, it's strong, but it's got like, there's a Mercury Neptune thing going on in there, and a Venus Uranus thing. So it's wild, but it's, you know, I can't lay a foundation on it. So I always, you know, took things with a grain of salt in that area, and realized, and like I say, I realized early on that I couldn't make a living at it. So for me, astrology was a practical matter. It kept me going in it. It kept me in touch with other people. So I always had dialogues and communications, and I loved to go to the conferences and meet people and talk about it and write about it. And you know, I liked history. I liked the history of astrology, and I kept digging deeper into that. And I got to this when I found out about Mesoamerican astrology. I really dove into that because I thought here was a great opportunity to find out something about astrology from a completely different perspective. I mean, the astrology of ancient Mexico is so different than Western astrology. It was unfortunately nipped in the bud, so I don't think it ever developed to the point that it could have. But you know, I dove into that intensely and made it a project, and went to Mexico and wrote a few books on it. So that was kind of my sideline. That was, you know, it was coincident with the Project Hindsight project. I was doing my own little Project Hindsight on Maya and Aztec astrology.
So did you know Bob Schmidt?
Oh yeah, I met him a few times, and I subscribed to. I sent him money, and they, you know, they would send me their books as they translated it. So I have those, and I've used a lot of them. You know, they've been very good. It was a good service that they did.
Oh no, he was one of my closest friends. He lived at our center for, I don't know what, 2 or 3 years.
Oh really?
That's when he became an astrologer. When he arrived, he came to the first neo-astrology conference we had in 1989. With John Townley brought him. And he and I just hit it off. He was kind of thinking of himself as a mathematician and a physicist. Really, he was a jack of all pretty high-level stuff. But he and I became friends. And then he decided that very year to come and live with us, because Matrix was going really good. And I paid him a salary to do about nothing, just because we got along well, right? And we had a wonderful time together. A little less fun with his wife, but still, she was whatever she was. But you know, but he and I were, and then when he left here, that's what he told me, is that then he kind of, I don't know if he ever really said I'm an astrologer, but he was definitely in the astrology community, you know, when they ramped up Project Hindsight. Yeah. And and I miss him to this very day. That he and I never talked astrology because I was not at all interested in Greek astrology. We talked about how we work, the kind of work we do in a day. That's mainly what we talked about for years. But he had a thing he called intensive magnitude. That it's hard to explain. It's just kind of this how certain moments have a certain magnitude or suchness to them, intensity. Anyway, we got a lot out of that. But anyway, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm just sort of saying, yeah, that's. I mean, I did readings for 9 years, so I totally get that. But the only thing I would say, in addition to what you said, is that heliocentric astrology, if you understood it, if one becomes a little bit empowered in that technique, saves an enormous amount of time. It's a very, very rich kind of astrology.
And yeah, I don't doubt that at all. I just never got to that point.
No, you bring it up twice now, the idea of that you had to work to make a living, which we all did. Yeah, I get that. I understand that. I'm just sort of saying, wow. What I'm interested in is, to some degree, it's none of my business, but your spiritual view. What kind of were you brought up in a certain religion, or what is your spiritual take on life?
I'll talk about that. Just before I do that, I just wanted, it popped into my head. One of the things I got out of Mesoamerican astrology was the how the day signs work. And what I found is that when you calculate somebody's day sign, and I used to use these techniques in my readings, I would know somebody's day signs, and that would give me immediate information on what were the most important points in the chart. And it was just as you have found heliocentric to be.
Right.
It was it was a way of pointing to things and saving, cutting right to the chase. And so anyway, I did that. But in regards to
no, but that just reflect on that. That is what I'm talking about. Exactly what you pointed at is exactly what I was pointing out. It's that there are techniques that are so rich that if you grasp how to use them, they can save you an immense amount of time. And you're telling me the same thing with your day signs.
And they point to other larger things about the person, what their larger destiny is. So I found that technique on my own.
Yeah, well, me too, with Helio, right?
Yeah. And so anyway, that was, one of the little things. If, on my charts, I would always sketch in what a person's day sign was and what their, where they were in their 13-day period or Tresena. And it was helpful. But in regard to spirituality, I was, my parents were Methodist. And when I was young, I had to go to church, and there came a point where, I didn't really want to go. I wasn't getting it, I was probably 13 or 14 or something like that. And so my father said, well, if you don't want to go, then you should, then you can quit, but we got to take you off the mailing list and all this other stuff. So I kind of officially quit church. And that really, riled a lot of people up. And I remember people ask me why. I said, because why should I have to wear a suit to go learn about a guy that wears robes and has long hair and a beard? I said, it's like insane. So that was my first experience with religion. And I kind of went on my own after that. I got into theosophy through Alan Leo.
Yeah, me too.
And so I dug into that. I read probably a lot of the Secret Doctrine.
Me too.
And I don't think I got through Isis Unveiled, but I tried. And I was reading, these other theosophists, and then led to Rudolf Steiner.
Well, how about Annie Besant?
Annie Besant.
Try reading that.
Yeah. I think I was she the one wrote a book on psychic. No, it was on auras. I think there was a book. I don't know. I was into it. I thought it was pretty cool. And when I was young and in high school, I was an avid sci-fi reader. I read all the sci-fi books I can get my hands on. So when I came across theosophy, it was like sci-fi.
Right.
It's crazy stuff, they're talking about. And I was always interested in UFOs. That goes way back to the time I was like 6 or 7, But so I drifted around, and I read Autobiography of Yogi, and there's a little astrology in there with
Did you learn anything autobiography, did you learn any of his songs?
No, I didn't learn the songs. I didn't really
pretty
know any.
unique.
Yeah, I'll bet. I didn't know anybody that really knew a lot about it. Now, but the gurus would come to Rutgers, and I saw a bunch of them, and Snatchadanda,
Satchidananda.
Satchidananda, and Sri Chimnoy,
Yep.
and a bunch of them would come by, and I would always go to see him with my girlfriend or by myself, and try to take it in and try to learn about it. And it was, then I got into Chinese, and I kind of really fell for Lao Tzu for a while. I thought that Taoism was really kind of cool nature stuff.
It
So
is.
yeah, and then Buddhism, and kind of walked around with it. And I can't say that I was so enamored of any one idea, approach to spirituality, but I liked them all. I was having psychic experiences. I was taking a lot of LSD, and I was having telekinesis experiences and lucid dreams. And, so then I got into kind of the astral projection stuff. And I guess when I came out of it, I was when I got married. My first wife was very practical, down to earth person who had a bad experience with Catholicism.
Right. I had one of those.
And what I had from all of that time with these things was I had learned how to meditate, and I kept meditating. I meditate to this day, right in the morning. Every morning I got a half hours. I sit there and I meditate and relax and try to empty my crazy mind. And so I got that benefit from it. But I kind of came to the conclusion, probably by the early mid to the mid 70s, that there was no way I'm going to figure out what's going on, but I'm going to try. And so I studied philosophy, Western philosophy, and
like what particularly?
Well, first it was Plato and Aristotle. I mean, I was a philosophy minor at Rutgers, because I went to Rutgers for 2 years, dropped out for 4 to play rock and roll, went back for 2, and majored in history with a minor in philosophy.
Wow.
So that sharpened up my thinking a little bit. So I got into that. Later, I got into Stoicism, which I find the most, from my way of thinking, the most compatible for who I am. There are particularly early Stoicism, later Roman Stoicism, which is what mostly everybody knows. It's like how to live. It's a practice. But I like some of the cosmological ideas and thoughts on cause and effect and freedom and free will and determinism. The Stoics really took on a lot of big problems, and it's unfortunate that almost all their important works are gone. It's a shame. So after that, my spirituality was sort of my own little thing. It was a mixture of some philosophy, some Hinduism, some Taoism, some Buddhism, and I always had friends that were into one thing or the other. And then psychology. I studied psychology. So I'm just sort of independent in that way. I've got Aries on the cusp of my 9th, and Mars is in Libra, and so I'm kind of I'm interested in just learning. It's like just keep learning. Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of just almost a carbon copy. Everything you said, I've done almost. I mean, in the sense that I was vice president of Michigan Theosophists. I read almost all of Steiner, which is a lot to do.
Yeah.
And I read almost all of Hegel, worked with a professor.
Yeah.
Really know that well. I never got out of high school. I got accepted at University of Michigan just because I was bright enough. But I went for 3 weeks and I said, this is just the same shit all over again. And so I just wanted to be out in the world, just living. So I hitchhiked to Venice West and lived on the beach in 1960, and lived in a place called the Gas House, which was an art gallery and poets. And I wanted to be a beatnik, but I, had missed that train. and there was only the kind of the remnants of it still happening. So, but anything, I was raised Catholic, and that was horrible. Other than maybe the love of mysticism and stuff like that came out of that for me. But anyway, I'll spare you a lot of it, but whatever you said was exactly the path I took. I loved Dion Fortune. I loved reading her stuff. Yep. She was a different kind of esoterist. I studied Western esoteric. I had all of Aleister Crowley's work.
Yep.
I had every bit on microfilm, everything he ever did. So I'm very, very, I don't know what, completist or something. If I get on something, it's hard to get me off of it.
That's kind of a Cancerian trait, I find. It's related to collecting.
Well, I've collected huge things, right? I mean, and I started out collecting nature. My love of nature, I was raised between two farms in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and there was no houses. There was no one. All I had was nature, so that I became really, really good at it. I became a herpetologist. At University of Michigan, had my own little office back in the stacks of pickled reptiles because I was so good at it, and I was only just a high school kid. But I was specialized in salamanders, and I developed, I did quite a bit of research, found a new way to measure the length of life of salamanders by staining the parasphenoid bones. So they had growth rings like on a tree. Oh. They had never done that before. It only worked in temperate climates. But anyway, what you say, so I think I understand you certainly better than I did, because I didn't much understand at all. But I always had the hint that, this guy's kind of like me, right? So we went to kind of the same route.
Yeah, it was like a self-discovery thing, and then spirituality. It's of interest. I mean, it still is of interest. I'm reading an Irving Laszlo book now on, it's basically a kind of a cosmology, and there's some articles and by other people, and I just keep taking it in. But on the other hand, I got this whole science thing happening that started when I was very young too. My father was an electrical engineer and introduced me to, looking at the stars. And so I got interested in astronomy and had a telescope, and then took me to the Museum of Natural History in New York at least once a year. And so I got interested in dinosaurs and fossils. And
me too.
So there was this astronomy and a paleontology theme, and naturalist theme.
I have tons of trilobites, which I found, and the whole deal. So it's very similar, right?
Yeah. So the science background is running all the time, and when I went to Rutgers, I hung in there for 2 years until my band got pretty popular, and then I just lost interest in it and dropped out in the middle of the third semester or fourth semester, and I had to make it up later. But the band imploded, so 4 years later I go back, and then I realized that I needed to sharpen my mind up.
I just we can talk about that, right?
Yeah, I just felt that people around me had a bunch of opinions, and not of it, a lot of it was thought through. So I went back, and they said, "Well, what's your major going to be?" And by that point, I had been into astrology for several years. It was that 4-year dropout that I got into astrology. I said, "Well, I'm a Cancer, so sign me up for history." So I signed up for a history major, and I proceeded to take all philosophy courses. And I did that for a while, and then I went to history, and I found out, wow, this is really good too. So I completed the major, and there was no job for it at that point. I was making money. I wasn't doing readings at that point. I was playing a little bit in a band, but mostly I was doing carpentry and home repairs and kitchens and baths, sometimes with other people and sometimes by myself. So I was a handyman, and I did that, along with a few other things until the astrology could pick up and become full-time, which it did right around like the late 70s, early 80s, somewhere around. That's when I went full-time. Although I was always still playing, a few times a month in the weekend with a band. So and then I realized I needed even more information about the history of science. So I got a master's at Montclair
Wow.
University in New Jersey, where I could drive to as like commuter. And I had it set up so I went one day a week. I think it was Wednesdays, and I would take like a 2.5 hour course in the afternoon and a 2.5 hour course at night. So I'd take 2 courses a semester, and I got a master's. And it was largely history of science, but there were other social science topics. And then around 1999, 2000, I met Lynn Margulis, who, yeah, so she was a well-known evolutionist and microbiologist. And we were sitting at a nature center. They were having authors book sales, and I was signing my hiking guides, selling them. She was selling her, science books. So we got to talking, and we both liked hiking, and we had both were in the process of hiking the what's now called the New England Trail, but we needed somebody to help spot cars so we could do it. So we decided to do that. We got to know each other, and then she said, "I want to hire you. I need somebody to help teach when I travel. I like the way you think, but you got to get a PhD, and I'm in the Department of Geosciences, so it has to be that." I said, "Good." So I did it, and for 15 years, I worked with her, got the PhD in geosciences with a concentration in the main focus was paleoclimatology, and I wrote my thesis on it was called a history and test of planetary weather forecasting. So I looked at Kepler's ideas on weather forecasting by astrology and tested them out, and I got by. So that's so that was my last educational thing. But I liked it. I liked it being in school and around people that had lots of ideas. There were, hardly anybody could understand where I was coming from. I mean, there was nobody there ever asked me well, maybe a few exceptions, an intelligent question about astrology.
Well, I mean, I think that's true among astrologers.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just I was functioning in a kind of an alien world, but I could deal with it, and I liked a lot of the people, and I got to liking what they were interested in too. There was a volcanologist, and I would talk to her, and then there was a sedimentologist, and I would talk to him and learn all sorts of things. So it was just a great environment to be in, and I miss it. I taught there for a few years after she died, but I was too old. And, they want you out of there when you're 65.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think I went a different way. I mean, I started in science, in herpetology, but I wasn't about to go to school, because for me, I'd always taught myself everything. And because I never got out of high school, I had to teach myself everything because, my friends would say, "Well, we'll see you at the car wash because you didn't go to college." It's out of my own choice not to. So what I did was became increasingly interested in spiritual stuff, and particularly Buddhism. I was staying up late nights, even in the late 50s, drinking instant coffee with powdered creamer and smoking cigarettes and talking about Ingmar Bergman films or Zen Buddhism. And so that was, and I tried sitting Zazen and stuff like that. But then 1974, I met Chogyam Trungpa. I got to be his chauffeur for a while. And he taught me to meditate just himself. And then he pointed out to me that Buddhism is not something to just speculate and talk about. It's something to do. It never occurred to me that I would actually do it. It was more like something to talk about late at night and stuff like that. But so I became totally into that, and then worked with a teacher who just died in 2019 for 36 years, learning a technique called Mahamudra, and going to Tibet with him. And I've been to Tibet a number of times, learned to read Tibetan, but pretty awful. But the main idea is that I went through, I didn't go to college. I went through a quite difficult regime that the Buddhists have called the preliminaries, the common preliminaries, the extraordinary preliminaries called Nundro, and then the special preliminaries. So it's a whole lot of, drop and give me 20 kind of stuff. But I did it all, even though it was difficult. And then since then, we've run a meditation center here since the mid 80s, but COVID kind of wiped it out. And also I'm too old. I don't want to really teach anymore. I just want to do stuff like this, what you and I are doing, meet people, find out what they're doing. But I think I do mostly, well, there's meditation and what's called non-meditation. I did meditation until I learned non-meditation. And I kind of learned, I do that most of the time. Most everything I do is a form of meditation.
Is that called mindfulness?
Well, mindfulness is a certain kind of meditation.
I don't know what non-meditation is then.
Okay. Yeah. If it's dualistic, subject and object.
Yeah.
Then you have something like shamatha, which are zazen. But if you learn to allow the mind to rest, then you're doing something that's sometimes called Dzogchen, sometimes Mahaadi, sometimes Mahamudra, but basically it's non-dual. It means that there's no subject and you're totally immersed. It's a total immersion, but just on the edge, also being aware at the same time. So yeah, we'd have to have a long discussion about it, but that's what I've been doing and working on. My teacher, I did 31 years of 10-day teachings. I had to drive to New York all those times, which is 800 miles one way.
Yeah.
And then we studied Mahamudra for 31 years. And that's what I'm doing now, just being old. And also I've done, a bunch of putting roofs on houses. I don't mean roofing, but putting the joists and everything. So I know some of that too. So you and I share some of that, but mostly where you've gone into the very detailed science stuff, I think I've gone into the, whatever you would call the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana path. So
yeah, well, that's pretty complicated stuff.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I remember the what's his name? The one that did the day the universe changed. James Burke, the British historian. I think he's British. He talked about scientific insights and change, and it was a series on TV. And then the last one, he says, well, science puts together the world this way, and it's very complex. But then he goes to Nepal, probably not Tibet, but he goes to a Buddhist center of some sort and starts showing how complex the Buddhist worldview is. And and that this is a completely relevant alternative way of mapping out what's going on. That's how he ended the series, and I was always very impressed with that. That was in the 80s, I think, when that came out.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what I've studied, is that instead of going to college, I've studied what are called Upadesha, also called pith teachings, not just sutras and stuff like that, but the very essence of what they've compiled over the centuries, particularly the various Mahasiddhas from India and stuff like that. So I've studied that, and I got to, of course, I got to meet the Dalai Lama pretty early on. He wasn't so famous, but I really got to meet what's called the Karmapa. It's the 14th Dalai Lama, but it's the 17th Karmapa. The Karmapa is the oldest reincarnate Lama. So I got to go and see him at his ancestral home in Tibet, and then be on video cruise with him, and spend time with him, and with the whole lineage. I'm part of a lineage called the Kagyu, you can say it either way. And so I've trained in that. And that's just kind of just the way you talk about your love of history and that's what I fell in love with. And and of course I'm doing astrology also.
Yeah.
My teacher took us to China, and Chinese astrology is something I've studied too, that very few people have studied. And he took us to a place of 5 mountains called Mount Wutai Shan. And that was supposedly, that's legendary, that's where the deity Manjushri appeared as a youth. And from the top of his head, so it's said, poured the 84,000 astrology teachings. And he gave them to humankind. This is just how the story goes quickly as I can. And humanity loved it, but they stopped practicing the Dharma. So he took them all back. And then what's called the second Buddha, Guru Rinpoche Padmasambhava, appealed to him to please give this back to people because they also need these astrology teachings. And he didn't quite give it back, but he hid them under rocks and in water and but mostly in the mind, what are called mind dharmas, teachings. Anyway, we went there and did puja on all 5 of the tops of those mountains. And it was a very profound experience. But anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I did.
Yeah.
It would be
Very
similar
cool
to
stuff. Yeah.
Well, it was yeah, but it
Get
was
around.
also
You got yourself around. I didn't travel quite as much as I would have liked to. I always felt you know, responsibilities to, marriage and you know, and I had to, the thing when you're making a living reading charts, today I could travel and do it remotely, but then you couldn't. You kind of had to be there.
no, you did.
But I turned down a lot of good opportunities with my hiking friends. A couple times they were going down to the Milford Tract in New Zealand and invited me, and then they were going to, the Alps and whatever. And I never was able to do that. I did most of my hiking in New England, but occasionally out west, and a couple times in Mexico and once in Ecuador, and that was about it. So that's how life is. You can't fit everything in, but you were, I think, very lucky to have all those, experiences and the opportunity to do that. It sounds really cool.
Well, we're interested in. I've always been interested in nature. We live on just a mile from the Manistee National Forest. It's 900,000 acres of forest.
Yeah. Do you remember when I was at your place?
Yeah, you came once, right?
And I borrowed your bike and I rode out there.
Oh, you did go out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know you were there one time. So anyway, we're very interested in food. I mean, I designed the logo for Eden Foods, for example. I was doing macrobiotic training in the very early 70s. And we're very careful about what we eat. We don't eat any processed foods. We only eat grains and vegetables, and I don't eat meat anymore, little fish. So, I mean, that's a whole nother world for me. I don't know if you touched on it, but I'm building a lot of raised beds, what are called, you know what hugel mounds are? It's a form of growing plants. Anyway, I ran greenhouses in part of Michigan in 1971, and I went to Florida and ran 19,000 square feet of greenhouses raising tropical plants. So I'm very interested in plants, and I spend a lot of time, or I did, not so much now, taking pictures of flowers. I have hundreds of thousands.
I've seen your work on Facebook. Very nice.
Yeah, there are some of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think there's where we diverged a little bit. But yeah, I don't think I'd travel much. I went to Tibet. I don't leave the house. I mean, I hitchhiked early on, but mostly I don't go anywhere. Not interested in going to Europe or anything. But I also have had a family and responsibilities. We've been married, 52 years.
Yeah. Well, but you did get out. You got yourself around. Yeah.
I did the Buddhist stuff.
The Buddhist stuff. Yeah.
That would be about it.
That's about it. Yeah. Yeah. I got down to Mexico quite a few times because I was interested.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, I also took acid and stuff like that. So that I'm very, very interested. In fact, a lot of my counseling astrologically was with acid heads, people who got themselves stuck in acid and felt they were the only one in the world. And I could show them pretty quickly they weren't the only one in the world, and they hated that, but it also popped a bubble. So, tell me more about whatever you learned spiritually from down there, because it must be interesting.
Well, for me, it was more like a kind of a cultural archaeology. The archaeoastronomers had gone through a lot of this information over the past 30, 40, 50 years, or even longer. And the conclusions of some of the leading ones, like Thompson, was that Maya astronomy, which everyone acknowledged was really sophisticated, was there to support Maya astrology. But the unspoken line was, but we don't know what that really is. So my challenge was to see if there was actually something to Maya astrology. Did it really work or not? And so I collected a lot of data of charts of celebrities and charts of people that I knew, and I ran it against the day signs. And at the time I was doing this, there was calendar correlation ambiguities. And I found one that seemed to work, seemed to lock in and sort of meshed with what I knew about the people, and also with what I knew about their Western astrology charts. So for me, it was, and I reconstructed the thing. I probably about 1989, 90, I put out the first book around then that was on day signs, where it was the results of this kind of study. So it opened my eyes to a very, very strange and different culture that I think was at a level comparable to the early Sumerians and early Egyptians. It's sophisticated in certain ways, but it doesn't have, the writing system was not, fully complete by the time the astrology was out. Later on, Maya hieroglyphs became a little bit more formalized and standardized. But
did you study did you do the astronomy? I mean, you must.
Yeah, of course, you had to know the astronomy too, because that was all baked in. But in a nutshell, what they seemed to be doing for their astrology was they were looking for lowest common denominators in regard to synodic cycles of the planets.
What, for instance?
So they knew all the synodic cycles.
Right.
And they were looking for numbers that would mesh with all the cycles to kind of bring them together so that it would facilitate calculations.
Right.
And the number 260 days turns out to be the magic number. And that incorporates the eclipse half year, the morning and evening star phase of Venus. It relates to the synodic cycle of Sun and Mars, and synodic cycle of Sun and Mercury, and a few other ones, and the moon. And, as you get, into bigger and bigger numbers, you can fit other things in it as well. That has calculation value for sure. The big question is, does it have astrological value? And that's kind of what I was digging at.
I mean, can you use it?
Yeah, I was able to use information about the day signs themselves. The idea that there was a 20-day waveform that was, it was creating or was imprinting a certain amount of variation on people born. And sometimes I explain it as sort of a natural way that variation is increased in the population, and that there's actually a 20-day cycle of it. But simultaneously, there's a 13-day rhythm going on as well. And the lowest common denominator of 13 and 20 is 260 again. You come back to that. The other thing I got was out of their accounts of the planet Venus. And their temples are aligned to Venus, rising positions at the heliacal rising. Right. It was deeply embedded in the 8-year cycle, synodic cycle of Sun 8 years and Venus 5 cycles, right? I mean, that was baked into their astrology. But one of the things they did was they divided the Venus synodic cycle into 4 parts, and the 2 conjunctions were very important. Now, the inferior conjunction, which we just saw like 2 weeks ago.
Right. That's right.
Okay. They thought this was the most important one, and this was the point that marked the transition from the old way to, the old God dies and the new God is reborn, but he's reborn in this like very immature state and is liable to making bad decisions. And so they considered the week or two after the Heliacal Rising to be very dangerous, and that people would be struck down and leaders would be challenged.
Was
So,
that was
for
that
example,
like was that like new moon to them?
yeah, like the first appearance of the crescent, right?
Right. What about the ahead and behind the sun?
That was still that was described in their myth as the time of the death of the old wave.
But did they discriminate between behind and ahead?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, so ahead marked a whole new thing, but there was a lot of writings have survived, or like some hieroglyphs and drawings, and they point to this period, this after the Heliacal Rising, as dangerous. And the Aztecs would cover their windows and close their chimneys because they didn't want anything to happen. But they kept talking about people being struck down, and there are more subtleties. It would vary over the 8-year period and so on. But anyway, an example is right in front of us, or right immediately behind us, because we had the Venus Sun conjunction. 4 or 5 days after that is the Heliacal Rising, and then right around that time, Trump has to turn himself into jail. Prigozhin gets shot down. I mean, talk about being struck down. And then you got the head of Spanish football being disgraced for a sexual issue. And that's exactly what the Maya and the Aztecs were talking about at this early phase of Venus. They kept going back to sex and control of sex, because in their mind, if you don't control sex, your society is out of control. And, that's, I mean, control of breeding is what gives us civilization.
Right. What about these day signs? I don't know much about them. How do I learn about them?
Well, the idea is it seems to be like a circadian rhythm kind of thing. Like there's a phase. It seems to they said it would start as the sun goes down, the new day sign would begin. And so it began at the night phase, and they had ways of dividing it, much like the houses in Western astrology. And then it would rise, go through the day, and then the transition point was at sunset. Generally, there's some discussion about that, but they would imprint you in various ways. You would have a certain kind of quality, and often a new child would be named after their day sign.
So how does one get their day sign? What are the calculations?
Oh, well, it's a calendar correlation. You can go online and do it. I have books that do it. I could look yours up if you like.
Yeah, if you do sometime.
Let me pull out. I think I have do I have a book here? Yeah, I think I do. Just don't want to knock everything else down. I got a stack of CDs over here I've been listening to early Roy Orbison this morning.
There's nothing better. Nothing better than that.
All right, let me see how far back this is a book that I put out with Barry Orr.
No, I just got it.
Yeah, and it has some. It's simplified in some ways, but it's okay. It's 19. What year were you born?
41. July 18.
Okay, so July 18.
And where are you? You have a beautiful vista behind you. What is that?
Yeah, I'm in Amherst, Massachusetts, Western Mass, and that's the farm in back of my property. There's
so this is where you live.
Yeah.
Beautiful. God.
It's nice.
I used to live in Swampscott, if you know where that is.
Where?
Swampscott, North Shore of Boston.
Oh, North Shore, yeah, by Cape Ann.
I used to race sailboats in Marblehead.
Yeah. Okay, so, and you were born during the day?
I was born at 5:03 p.m.
Okay, well, the sun was still up.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were born on 6 Monkey.
Okay, what's 6
Twin.
Monkey?
Actually, I was born on 5 Monkey. Haha.
What's
yeah.
6? So
well,
monkey,
you see what happens is you have this count of 13 days.
Okay.
And then it's running against a count of 20 days, and the 20 days are the day signs. The count of 13 are numbered, and there's some questions about their thing, but Chuen is it's a sign of monkey. And
so how many animal signs are there? Or whatever
most of them are animals. Yeah, so let me get let's see.
But is that a 20 or a 13? The monkey.
It's a part of the 20.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
So there's correlations between each of the day signs and the 4 directions. So in 20, you have, it goes east. Let's see. So you go east, north, west, south in that order. And they repeat 5 times in the 20-day period. And in Mesoamerican astrology and cosmology, the number 5 is important because they recognize the 4 quarters plus the center, plus the axis. So there are a lot of things about Mesoamerican astrology that have similarities to Asian astrology.
Well, that's the truth. In Tibetan astrology or Chinese astrology, they have that.
Yeah. I even wrote a couple of articles about possible connections, and there's some evidence that there were trans-Pacific, trips that had been taking place, particularly on the coast of Ecuador. There seemed to be some artifacts that look like Homon Japanese pottery, the early Japanese pottery. But anyway, so then you have, of the 20-day signs, you're born under the sign Chuen or Ozomatli. There's a band called Ozomatli.
Oh,
and Mexican, American band, but that's the name for the day sign monkey.
Oh.
And it's one characterized by the arts and diversity and playfulness, among other things. And it's you could look it up in my description in here. It's artisan, craftsman, artistic, clever, demonstrative. You see it with people that are in the arts, that are interested in the arts, that are doing things like that, that are creative, that are versatile.
Well, my whole family's, craftsmen or musicians, or my brother's a famous guitar.
Oh, I have his book. I learned how to set up a guitar from him indirectly.
Well, he was my lead guitarist, right?
Yeah.
My drummer was the only one that became famous. Iggy Pop was
right.
Was
you told me that one time.
Right.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. So the day sign and you were born within the 13-day period, Simi, which is skull. It has to do with sacrifice. It's got a whole mythology behind it. I find that it's a there's a sense of civic and social responsibility that's kind of baked in with that sign. But that's another underlying level. One of the questions I asked myself continuously while I was studying this was that what levels of interpretation are we talking about here? These are very different perspectives from Western astrology, which has a very different perspective from Western psychology. Right. So maybe this has a lot to do with what you're talking about in regards to inclination. You step over here and it looks very different from when you step over there.
So attitude.
Yeah. So the day sign and the 13-day sign it's found in are 2 things that I got somewhat of a handle on early on, and I used it a lot in the 80s and 90s, and I haven't used it a lot since then. There has some, after 2012 in particular, I kind of put my hat back in the ring around 2012 because I kept getting asked questions about it, and so I did some interviews and talks and whatnot. But Mesoamerican astrology has, in my life right now, is receded pretty far into the background. So I'm not up on it, but I certainly still have an interest in it. It's just how many things can you do? I just don't have the energy.
Is there some place on the internet where you can go, it'll calculate it for you?
Yeah, yeah. But if you bought that book that I just held up, there are tables in there.
Oh, okay. I haven't gotten that far.
Yeah.
I looked at it. That book is a lot to read.
Well, maybe are we talking about this book here? It's called Mayan Astrology. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. There's really not.
Oh no, maybe we're not talking about that.
You're probably talking about the nature of astrology.
I think I'm talking about that. What's that book like?
Well, that's kind of my magnum opus, I guess. It's.
Well, that's pretty detailed. The one
I have. That's my big argument about what astrology is.
And that's the one I've got, but it's pretty deep. You can
that's that. Yeah, and I actually kind of simplified it in some ways. But the point of that book is to argue that, number one, astrology should properly be considered a subject. And I think that astrologers and the critics of astrology make a big mistake when they focus on practice and then start yelling at each other, whether it's an art or a science. I think that's like just a complete waste of time.
But to me, the whole thing is a waste of time of trying to convince anyone of anything.
Yeah, well, but I mean, if you say it's a subject,
it is.
You right away solve all these problems. We talked about the history of astrology. We talked, maybe obliquely about the philosophy of astrology. Then there's, theories of astrology, and then there's research on astrology, which we could say is science. And then there's the practice of astrology, which is 99.5% of what people do. But that's a result of historical circumstances.
Right.
It has control of the subject right now. And I think there's a lot of problems with that. And so that book, I argue very strongly that that's how it should be thought about. And the second thing I argue is that astrology studies one thing and one thing only, and that is self-organizing systems. And when you study self-organizing systems, whether you're a biologist or a climatologist, you find yourself in situations where you can't use reductionist science to get anywhere. You can target it at a few things, but you have to approach self-organizing systems in a non-reductionist way, at least initially. And a lot of people in science know that already. But because we're so addicted to reductionism, that hasn't gotten through. And people say, well, follow the science. And when people say science, what do they mean? It's reductionist science.
Right.
Basically experiment and mathematical modeling. And if it doesn't fit, it's not real. No, but self-organizing systems defeat that. And self-organizing systems are like that hurricane, or a personality, like a body, a cell. And then I talk about this idea that's, been discussed by biologists and by sociologists, the idea that the combined communications of many people creates its own self-organizing system. One example would be the stock market.
But it starts to sound like cybernetics, right?
Exactly. I mean, I had Landscheidt's book on cosmic cybernetics. I had that when it came out, and it took me like 20 or 30 years to figure out what he was talking about. But when I did, I realized this guy was on the money right away.
No, he's the only astrologer that I feel that I absolutely learned from stuff I couldn't have found anywhere.
Yeah.
So did you know him at all? I mean, I got to know him.
I corresponded with him a few times, and I did write his obituary, and his wife sent me a
is she still
for it.
Where is she at now? Do you have
I don't know. This was when he died. What was that, about 15 years ago?
I mean, she doesn't use computers, so you have to write her letters.
She sent me, I was at the University of Massachusetts, and so she sent it to I guess she probably contacted the secretary who gave her the address. And so I got a picture of him and a nice letter and thank you and all that. But he was good. He was helpful to me. I mean, he actually gave me some ideas that I incorporated into my thesis.
Well, that's what he did. I mean, I sent him his first computer in 1978. He had no computer, and he did a lot of his research. I sent him one, which was hard to do, send it to Europe. And then he came to our center. He and I were friends. He was not the most friendly person. He's not like we're talking pretty friendly. he was much more serious all the time. But I think that he's the one. I learned more from him than any other astrologer. I mean, I got a chance to meet Rudyard, you name them, and they all taught me something. I read everything Rudyard wrote, but ultimately didn't learn much from him. But I learned an incredible amount from Landscheid.
Yeah.
And
well, I heard
you,
Landscheid.
I didn't understand it either for a long time.
I heard him speak. I was just going to say that I heard him speak in New York. I was pretty young at the time, and I said to myself, this guy knows something, but I'm not sure if I understand it. And that's when I bought his book and put it in my shelves, and eventually, cracked it. It took a while. Rudyard too. I actually have to say I got a lot out of Rudyard.
I spent a lot of time with him, but I don't know that I got a lot out of him.
I liked his approach. He was a bit of a philosopher, but I liked his, the way he brought in these kind of sociobiological elements, like the way he described the lunation cycle.
Well, no, it was wonderful. I'm not. Yeah. He was just kind of an odd bird. I actually did you ever meet him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I heard him talk. I bought a book and shook his hand. I don't remember. I vaguely remember. It was in New York again. I used to go to New York at the, Henry Weingarten would put on.
That's right. I know Henry, right? Yeah. Well, Woody came to my house and we got a chance to talk. And the strangest thing happened. You might stop me if you already know the story. That, of course, I had to ask him about heliocentrics, right? Because that's what I was totally into. And he said that he kind of poo-pooed it. There's nothing to it, really. It was very dispiriting to me. And then about an hour later, he came back to me and he was like in a trance. And he just began spewing all the stuff about the value of heliocentrics, which of course he had because it's in his books. But so there was another element to him that I'd never understood that was kind of like auto something. This stuff just came out of his mouth, but it was like not what he said just an hour before, right? It was totally like, what I don't know what you call that. It was just like he was no, he was touching into something and then reading from that. But but it was real stuff. But it was like, wow. I said, what's just like you did with the Mayan stuff, what's that, right? I don't know what was happening with it. But anyway, no, I learned a lot from him too, but not the kind of stuff, Landscheid stuff I learned was revolutionary for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know that. And I think I sent you the stuff Schmidt. I had Schmidt.
You did.
And that's the problem with Landscheid is that he annotates everything, and then he makes no personal comments except maybe a paragraph about what does it all mean. Yeah. Other than he sets you up and shows why. He's perfect at annotating stuff, but he doesn't really help you understand the way I would view it. Anyway, I guess it's just me.
Well, he was a bit of a scientist there, and I've read his papers on climatology.
Yeah, me too.
And boy, they really the climate change skeptics really seized on him. Boy, his papers are still online because of that. And he was a bit of a climate change skeptic too.
Well, he said we're going into a little ice age, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you discount anthropogenic greenhouse gas forcing, we should be.
Yeah, maybe so.
But yeah, I think the climate change, the global warming thing was hard for a lot of people to deal with. Seems pretty apparent now, though.
It's totally apparent, and I spend a lot of time. Do you monitor the solar activity? I mean,
I go to space weather now and then and see what's going on. I'm interested in near Earth objects and what's going on with the sun, the strength of the solar wind, things like that.
Well, a better one is the ham radio one, solar ham.
I haven't been to that.
Well, it's much easier to see everything at once.
I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah, I look at both of them, of course, but solar weather just says the stuff when they feel like writing an article and stuff, and says a little bit about what's going on. But all the dials and stuff are right on Solar Ham. You look at it, you can immediately see the activity, and they give you links to all the other places in the world to do this Helios stuff. Anyway, but if you don't know it, you should.
Yeah.
You like
One
it.
thing I want to do, I did. It was part of my thesis. I looked at the solar irradiance, total solar TSI, total solar irradiance, which was a combination of multiple readings from the sun that were taken from a satellite between late 80s and the mid 90s. And I took that data and I ran it against the positions of the outer planets calculated with Barbauld's cyclic index.
I don't know that, but
yeah, that's where you take the angular separations between the planets and add them together. And so you get a low figure when they're all clustered together, and you get a high figure when they're spread apart. Oh, so what I did was there was Uranus, Saturn, Neptune.
Right.
We're all very close in the early 90s. And so I ran those two graphs against each other. And basically, as the solar activity went up, the cyclic index went down, and they were almost like an inverse of each other. So you could do a correlation, coefficient and show that they were inversely related. But then I realized that, I could probably do this very effectively if I could just find out what wavelengths, were really responding well to, planetary alignments, heliocentric. But I never got there. I just, I went on to other things. But that's kind of been in the back of my mind. If I can get if a data set appeared, then I would run with it. But I got other things too. I still want to finish up my work on Jupiter and rainfall. That's another one that I started and never finished.
Yeah. I spend quite a bit of time monitoring, and also I write about all this stuff, right? What I think it means. And I don't know whether you think that's pretty ridiculous, but
no, see, you have a view on things.
Yeah,
I do that too. I've read your stuff; it's very good, and I think it's nice of you to give it away.
Well, they're not going to pay for it. I should pay them to take it and read it, right? In a sense, yeah. But
you've made it public. You made your personal library public.
Exactly.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, and I gave my huge library to the University of Illinois, right? Stuff like that. So I've got rid of all my stuff. My CD collection is now Michigan State.
Oh wow.
800,000 CDs.
Oh,
yeah, so that's a lot of music.
Yeah, I every day I got a pretty good sized collection of CDs. Got rid of most of my albums, have some left, but every week I come down, I grab about a half dozen CDs. I just lay them on top of this old boombox I have here, and I just push one on each day, and I play it over and over again while I work and do my email and all that other stuff. I just, I keep acting like Roy Orbison was today. What's tomorrow going to be? Looks like Blur.
That Roy Orbison isn't. I don't know Blur. I mean, I think I know the name, but I don't know the music.
They're pretty good. They're pretty good.
Well, Roy Orbison is really good, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, unbelievable good.
This is the rockabilly album. He's got Ooby Dooby on it.
Yeah, I mean, all of his stuff is, I bow at his feet. Since it's some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard.
I really like rockabilly, and it kind of goes with surf music. So I have this band. We don't play very often, but we practice now and then, called the Retromatics. And we play, a lot of, Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis.
Where we live in Ann Arbor, I don't live there now, but there's a guy named George Bedard. George is a great rockabilly player.
That sounds kind of familiar.
You probably may have heard some.
Maybe I heard about it. I don't know.
He's just really, really, really good. there's a whole huge music scene in mid and northern Michigan that I'm getting too old to be much a part of it anymore. But my daughter's right in the middle of it. But so before COVID, I went to all these events, but I still wear masks if I go to one of those events.
Yeah.
I have to be really careful. Anyway, I think this has been good. I hope that you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, nice to speak with you, Michael.
Yeah, no, you were going to send me something. What was it? And I guess or if there's a book that I should read, you say it's the other book that I don't have. That's the one I should get to learn about the days.
Yeah, there's several.
Well, what would
there's one book I wrote is just about the day signs themselves. It's called Day Signs.
Is that the one to get?
Well, yeah, that gets into the descriptions are a little bit more detailed, right?
Uh-huh.
And then there's the one that I showed you how to practice Mayan astrology, which is kind of brings together all the different elements of Mayan astrology that I fleshed out of the records there and put together in some ways. And it has tables where you can look up your day sign.
I think that's what I would like. I want to know what the interpretations are. Which book is that?
I think I have some of it. I'll send you one. Just send me your address. I'll send you one. I got some extra copies here.
Oh, okay. That'd be fantastic. Yeah. And if anything, or I give all my books away. Trying to think of, if anything I can ever do for you. I really enjoyed this. I think you're really great. And that
thanks.
And we're kind of like brothers from another mother idea. That you've done all the stuff I've done in your own way, and then we branched off a little bit. I went toward the very detailed spiritual stuff, and you went through the very detailed scientific stuff, which I would have liked to do too, but I didn't. And I did early on. I was really, really detailed.
Yeah, well, you kind of gets pushed in certain directions when you're young, and I have to say my father pushed me in that direction by taking me to that museum every year and other museums, and I kind of I was immersed in it, and so when you're young, you get imprinted, and
absolutely an acid imprint, really.
Well, that can alter your imprints if you want to dig down deep, and rearrange the psyche. That definitely worked. It worked for me. I mean, I basically tuned in, turned on, and dropped out. And, spun around a few times. But when I came out of it, I felt I was my own person. I really wasn't that controlled by the expectations of the tribe that I was a part of.
Well, if you have a good acid trip, which means a rough one, that's good for you, that is, and I've spent decades studying this, that is basically what the Buddhists call the recognition of the nature of the mind. You're getting it, and even if it's not, it may take you 30 years to sort it out, just like you talked about the cybernetics book. It's hard I help people sort out acid trips because it takes a long time to get those imprints so that they're usable. But I still think that my first acid trip was in 1964. It was Sandoz acid. But in that night, I realized for the first time that a lot of what I was seeing was my own projection.
Yeah.
And that I was watching it in rapt attention and terror, but I was also projecting it. In that one night, I saw that, and it made an indelible impression that, gee, I could do this. I could sort this out. It gave me the ability to change my destiny, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think I really love what acid did. Other drugs I could care less about, but hallucinogenics were pivotal for me. Changed my life.
I'd say for me too. Do you have any connection with Ralph Metzner, Stanislav Grof, those people?
His wife just asked me to write something for him.
Yeah, I work with Kathy.
Oh, well, I mean, I think I wrote something, but mostly I just tried to make it pleasing. I didn't have too much to say. about
It
it.
was
Wasn't
for his
that
book, Maps of Consciousness, right?
right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
she had me write one. I wrote her a little blurb.
Well, I wrote a little blurb, but uh, that kind of book I'm not too crazy about. I mean, first of all, I've been studying the Mahasiddhi, the Upadesha, the incredible stuff that's in the Buddhist canon, and that's really what people need to do, from my point of view.
Well, that's an introductory book, is what
it is.
That's for somebody who is just curious about it. But I think his 2 chapters on astrology really fulfill that goal well. I mean, he explains astrology well for somebody that's not involved in it.
Yeah, I mean, I was not impressed, but then I'm not impressed by astrologers. In fact, that's one other thing. Are there any younger people or even older people that you think I should talk to, like we talk, that would be worth talking to? And I won't publish this if we do. I know if anything I publish, I send to you first.
Yeah.
If you decide to make a video.
I've met astrologers of all ages, and there are some that are very sharp. I think that there is a tendency in astrology to focus way too much on the practice and not enough on the bigger picture. So I would say it's hard to find somebody that is going to do that.
No, but is there anyone that you think that would like to talk to me?
Now, let me think about it.
Think about it. If you think of some, let me know, because I'm kind of reaching out. Like, you're one of the persons. Well, I knew that you were going to be like you are, and you are, which is pretty good. But I don't know many other people that, most of them are dead.
Yeah.
That I used, that were good friends, like Bob Schmidt and Noel Till and I were good friends, believe it or not.
I was very good friends with Bob Zoller.
I met Bob through Schmidt, but he was a little nuts. But
he was, He and I used to go do a lot of camping and backpacking in the Catskills.
That I like,
and lots of hiking. We were like good buddies for 10 or 15 years.
Well, he was certainly bright enough, right?
Oh yeah, but he was a wild man. He was like a Viking. I have like great memories of him. One time camping, I don't know if you remember Linda Martin. She was around for a while, but there were a couple of astrologers and some of my friends. We'd backpacked into the Catskills and we're camped by a creek, and we get up Sunday morning, and he just got into delivering this sermon on the Nordic gods that I wish was recorded. It was fantastic. That guy knew so much about runes and Nordic mythology. He went on and on and on. We were all like spellbound by it. I have great memories of him.
Well, I think I just got the blowback from the disagreements between Schmidt, especially Ellen, with him. So I never got to know him too much personally or anything like that. So,
well, he was a bit of a hothead, but he and I had a great relationship. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, so anyone,
I'll think about it. I'll think about it, and I'll get back to you.
All right. Are we good then?
Yeah, we're good. Nice talking to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks
for having me on your show here.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Right.